clothes for children in need, while volunteers moved between booths with practiced cheer. Among them stood Jackson Whitmore, a billionaire whose name few recognized here. He had chosen not to be introduced, not to speak. He watched from a quiet spot near the trees, his tailored coat catching the light, his hands in his pockets. There was a stillness in his expression, a man more used to observing than being seen. Not far away, Ilara Monroe, 27, gently pushed a small wheelchair along the uneven pathway. Her golden, wavy hair framed a face marked by quiet resilience, and her eyes, though tired, remained attentive to every need of the child before her. Lila, her 4-year-old daughter, wore a pink dress, her legs motionless but her spirit alert. Her hair was tied into 2 neat ponytails. From her chair, she studied the world carefully, especially the tall man standing under the trees. Ilara knelt beside her. "Do you want to go see the balloons, sweetheart?" But Lila was staring at someone else. Jackson had just crouched to help a boy pick up his dropped juice box. Lila watched him, blinking. There was something in the way he moved, gentle, unhurried, real. A volunteer passing by noticed her gaze. Smiling, she leaned closer and said playfully, "Would you like that nice man to adopt you? He looks like he'd be a great dad." A few people around chuckled softly. Ilara gave a tight smile and opened her mouth to redirect the moment. But Lila spoke first. She turned her head, looked at the volunteer, then at Jackson, then finally up at her mother. Her expression was serious, composed in a way that made Ilara freeze. And then, clearly and calmly, she said, "Please don't adopt me. Adopt my mom instead." The laughter vanished. All sound seemed to fade, leaving a stunned stillness in its place. Several heads turned. The air tightened with surprise and confusion. Jackson straightened slowly, caught off guard. He looked down at the small girl who had just said something no one knew how to respond to. Ilara's heart slammed in her chest, her cheeks flushed with heat. "Lila," she whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand, unsure whether to hush or hold her. But Lila remained still. She had not spoken from impulse. She had watched her mother cry quietly behind closed doors, watched her struggle with shopping bags, with wheelchairs, with hope. She had asked why other kids had 2 parents, and why her mom always looked away when people talked about family. She had heard Ilara whisper apologies she did not understand but never forgot. So, when she saw Jackson, kind eyes, calm presence, no pity, something stirred in her. In her young mind, adoption was not about papers or custody. It meant a safe place. It meant someone choosing you, loving you, staying. And if someone deserved that more than anyone, it was her mom. She had decided. Jackson slowly walked over and crouched again, lowering himself until he was eye level with her. His eyes, usually unreadable, now held something raw. He gently placed his hand over hers where it rested on the armrest. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard," he said, his voice low, moved. Ilara stood frozen. She could barely meet his eyes. Her throat tightened. There were no words. Around them, people watched, not with judgment, but awe. No one expected such a small voice to carry so much truth. Jackson looked back at Lila and smiled, a little slower this time, a different smile, one that meant something had shifted. In his chest, something long dormant stirred awake. It was not just admiration, or pity, or curiosity. It was the beginning of a realization that sometimes the simplest words, spoken by the smallest voices, could unlock a door you never knew existed. And so, with one sentence, a child had planted the first seed of change in a man who thought he had already lived enough to never be surprised again. Before the pink dress and the small wheelchair, before North Haven and late autumn charity events, Ilara Monroe had a different life, one filled with motion, music, and dreams. At 23, she was on the cusp of becoming a professional ballerina, having earned a hard-won scholarship to one of Chicago's most prestigious arts academies. Her instructors called her a natural. Her peers admired her grace. Her future looked bright, a life aimed at center stage. She always wore her long, softly curled blonde hair in a bun during rehearsals, her eyes focused, her heart pulsing with every note. The stage was the only place she felt truly alive. Then everything changed. Just weeks before a major audition that could launch her career, she found out she was pregnant. The father, a street guitarist she'd met the summer before, disappeared as soon as she told him. No promises. No arguments. Just silence. Everyone told her she still had time to walk away, that she could have her life back. But Alara chose to stay. She gave up the audition, gave up the academy, gave up the spotlight. And when Lila was born, her world shrank to a hospital room, then shattered again when doctors explained that her daughter had a rare spinal condition. Lila would likely never walk. There was no time to mourn. Not for her career, not for her old life, not even for her child's diagnosis. There was only survival, and she committed to it fiercely. Over the next 4 years, Alara worked every job she could. Mornings at a coffee shop, weekends cleaning houses, nights selling used clothes online. She memorized bus routes, cut her own hair, skipped meals to afford medication, and learned to lift Lila's wheelchair with one hand while carrying groceries with the other. They lived in a cramped ground-floor unit in a decaying North Haven building. The rent was low, the heat unreliable, but it was safe, and Alara turned it into a home. She stayed neat, even when tired beyond words. Her golden hair was always combed, her clothes plain but clean. Lila wore her pink dress, refashioned from one of Alara's old stage costumes, stitched and restitched with fraying thread and a mother's care. Their days were small, but full. Alara taught Lila letters with sidewalk chalk. At night, she read fairy tales aloud, giving each character its own voice, delighted by Lila's laughter. Her daughter loved stories where queens didn't need rescuing, and where magic came from inside the heart. But even the strongest love bends under pressure. One winter night, after a double shift and a long walk through snow, Alara sat at the kitchen table holding a letter from a non-profit she had hoped would help with Lila's next round of physical therapy. The answer was no. Missing paperwork, insufficient eligibility, maybe next year. She didn't cry at first. She just sat there, hands trembling, eyes unfocused. Later, curled together on their thin floor mattress, Lila stirred and whispered, "Mommy, am I a burden?" Alara froze. Then, her heart cracked open. She pulled Lila into her arms and held her tightly, tighter than ever before, as if her embrace could shield them from every cruel thing in the world. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "No, baby, never. You are why I wake up, why I fight. You are not my burden. You are my reason." Lila didn't speak again. She nestled into her mother's chest, tiny fingers fisting gently into her shirt. And for a moment, despite everything, the world felt just a little lighter. That night, in the quiet of a one-room apartment with peeling paint and flickering light, there was something stronger than struggle, stronger than fear. There was love. And Alara, though exhausted and uncertain, held on to the only truth that had never wavered. She would give anything for Lila. Anything. Jackson could not get her eyes out of his mind. Alara Monroe. There had been something in the way she looked at her daughter, quiet strength wrapped in exhaustion. And Lila, the little girl in the pink dress with the too-grown voice who had asked him, a stranger, to adopt her mother. That moment had etched itself into his memory. He had attended hundreds of charity events, met countless faces, but this felt personal. A few days later, unable to shake the image from his mind, Jackson asked his assistant to quietly gather background on Alara and Lila. Nothing invasive, just the basics. The report was brief. A single mother, ground floor apartment in one of the oldest buildings in North Haven, one of Jackson's own properties slated for redevelopment. No debts, no legal issues, no complaints, Just a woman juggling 3 part-time jobs, raising a disabled daughter alone, always paying rent on time. Jackson stared at the page for a long while. It wasn't what the report said, it was what it didn't say. It didn't speak of how often she probably cried in silence. It didn't say how tired she must be, or how lonely. It couldn't measure what it took to keep showing up for life with grace when everything inside wanted to collapse. But somehow, he felt it all. One afternoon, under the pretense of reviewing site plans, Jackson visited the building. He stayed back until he spotted Alara climbing the crooked staircase, a laundry basket in her arms. Her foot slipped, the basket tipped. Without thinking, Jackson stepped forward and caught her elbow, steadying her with one hand as socks and towels scattered. "Careful," he said with a faint smile. "This staircase might be the next thing to fall apart." Alara flushed as she realized who he was. Thank you. I didn't know." "That I'm the landlord?" he finished gently, releasing her arm. "Yeah, most people don't. I should have fixed these stairs months ago." She nodded, unsure what to say. He knelt, gathered the spilled laundry, handed her the basket, then he left, no fanfare. A few days later, he returned with a small box of cookies and a children's storybook. He knocked lightly. Lila opened the door with wide eyes and a delighted grin. He sat cross-legged on the floor as Lila chattered on about a magical forest, a talking squirrel, and how her mother used to be a real princess who lost her crown when Lila was born. Jackson smiled, listening. Alara hovered in the doorway, quiet and guarded. He made no grand gestures, no promises, just kept showing up, with fruit, puzzles, a small coloring book. Never too much, never pity, only presence. One evening, while folding dish towels nearby, Alara paused as Lila softly asked, "Mom, do you miss dancing?" Alara stilled. "I do," she said gently, "but no one needs to see me dance anymore, sweetheart." Jackson didn't speak, but her words clung to him. The next week, something quietly changed in the neighborhood park. A wooden platform appeared beside the playground. A mirror leaned against one post. Fairy lights strung overhead. A painted sign read, "For those who still remember how to dance." Alara noticed it while pushing Lila on the swings. A group of little girls played on the new platform, spinning, giggling, trying to mimic ballet moves. Some were from the weekend dance group she taught for free. One mother called out, "Miss Alara, show them how it's done." She laughed awkwardly. "Oh, no, I couldn't." But then, music flowed through the park speakers. A soft classical melody, familiar, one she had danced to once, years ago. Something shifted. She stepped forward, one foot on the platform, then the other. Her shoulders rolled back, her arms lifted, her body remembered. She moved, light as breath, elegant, effortless, like she'd never stopped. Jackson watched from a distance, hands in his pockets. He didn't approach, didn't take credit. He only smiled. He hadn't given her a stage. He had given her back a piece of herself. Jackson kept showing up. Not with grand gestures, but in quiet, steady ways, like morning sun through an old curtain, or the warmth of tea on a cold afternoon. He brought books for Lila, puzzles, stories, and once, a balloon animal that made her laugh so hard she nearly tipped out of her wheelchair. Alara watched him with cautious eyes. Every smile, every small gift tightened something inside her. Kindness without expectation was unfamiliar. She worried. Not for herself, but for Lila. What if Jackson disappeared? What if this comfort faded like all the others? What if her daughter started hoping for a family that was never going to be real? So she kept a polite distance, thankful but guarded. Jackson never pressed. He seemed to understand the unspoken boundaries. He asked about Lila's therapy, not about Alara's past. He complimented her soup, not her sadness. And he listened, really listened. When she spoke, one rainy afternoon, thunder murmured low in the distance as Jackson arrived, holding a small umbrella and a book. The rain kept them on the covered porch of Ilara's unit. Lila curled up under a blanket and fell asleep in her mother's lap. Ilara poured ginger tea into chipped mugs, her hand slightly trembling as she passed his cup. They sat side by side in silence, watching the rain bead down the railings. Then Jackson said quietly, "I used to think losing my mom was just a sad part of my past, but lately, I wonder if that was when I stopped really living." Ilara turned her head. He was not the polished businessman in that moment, not the billionaire, just a boy who had needed someone and never got them. After a beat, Ilara spoke. "The night I left the stage, I sat in my dressing room for hours. I didn't cry. I stared at my shoes. They were clean, ready to perform, but I knew they'd never dance again." Jackson looked at her. "I don't regret it," she added. "Not when I see Lila's face. The day she was born, she looked at me like I was her whole world. That's when I knew I had to be the ground she stood on, even if she couldn't walk." Their eyes met. No confessions, no promises, just two people quietly unraveling old wounds in the safety of each other's presence. The next day, Jackson took Lila out on a small outing, just them. They came home with new colored pencils and fresh paper. Lila was beaming. She held something behind her back. "It's a surprise," she said, giggling when Ilara asked. For days the drawing stayed hidden, until one evening, while changing the pillowcases, Ilara found it. Drawn in soft crayon lines was a picture of three people: a tall man with dark hair, a woman with long yellow curls, and a little girl in a pink dress, all smiling, holding hands. Above them floated a large red heart. Ilara froze. She gripped the paper, breath hitching. She walked barefoot onto the small balcony, blinking against the pale sky. And then the tears came. She pressed the drawing to her chest and whispered, voice cracking, "Ilara, what are you doing? This isn't your life. You don't get to dream like this." She had learned